Philomela spent much of her life following Hippocrates' dictums. One of them was to get magic out of medicine and make it more scientific. And Philomela is credited, by the way, with founding the concept of gynecology. So these two cousins of Apostle Paul are almost totally forgotten. The other one was Hermione, the daughter of Philip the Deacon, who was, by the way, the patron saint of medicine in the city of Constantinople. And the early Christians were condemned for some very fascinating things. Of course, a lot of people considered them atheists because they didn't have any statues around. But also, we find in the people who wrote against the Christians that they're called a medical sect by some of the Roman critics, because they spoke so much about healing. Because, of course, salvation in this matter is healing. The word soter comes from one who heals. Even the word salvation is rooted in the same root word as salve or ointment. And salvation is a healing process. And the Christians reached out to everyone around them without any kind of distinction. And Pliny, who was, I never remember if the elder or the younger, was the first one to organize a persecution against the Christians. He was governor in Cappadocia and Pontus. And he complained that the Christians were dangerous because they care for all without distinction. If they cared only for their own, they wouldn't be so dangerous. But they care for all without any distinction. And this was one of the, but we also forget very often at how much had been developed in pre-Christian times in the Hellenic world, the Hellenistic world. That the Gnostics, I don't know if you realize, there were a group of semi-Christians who were called Gnostics, and they thought the body was evil and was a prison of the soul. So they really wanted to destroy all the medical corpuses that existed, the medical writings and things, and the Christians, well, let's say the Orthodox, rescued all these writings. And there were quite a substantial a number of them. And some of the methods for psychosomatic part of healing that were developed in the Hellenistic world are really astonishing and marvelous. And we could even look back at those and still to this day learn a great deal about it. But the idea of just opening up a charity and we're going to give donuts and coffee and a backpack with a toothbrush in it or something is, that's fine. I mean, we need to do that sort of thing. But in a sense, when we're just doing that, or building an infrastructure to pass out food and clothing, we're just buying the problem off. And we're still not validating the humanity of these people. And we're still not realizing that these are intelligent human beings who have a personhood, sometimes very talented, and sometimes are so crushed down by the conflict between their intelligence and skills and abilities and talents and the things that prevent them from using them, that in itself drives them to suicide. Because it's overwhelming to think that I could do this, but I may not do it. And those are aspects that are almost entirely missing in all the discussions about what kind of charitable work we should do. The word charity in our day means a sort of condescending passing out of stuff. And that isn't nearly enough. So that's almost entirely what I want to say, that we need to get together and you know, if we want to take something to people, we need to sit down and talk to them and find out their story and find out what they have and what they can do. And it takes more than, more resources, and certainly more resources than we have. But I'd like to find some of these people and invite them to give a concert or something sometime. The ones who can play music, or the ones who can sing, or the ones who can do other things, or the ones who can read poetry. And some of them write poetry that sounds rather bizarre, and yet it's extremely important poetry. Because like the Psalms, it's a cry of human hearts. And let them read their poetry and listen to it and try to see what it's trying to say as well. Those are the sort of things that we ought to do. there are plenty of people already feeding these people. If you want to do it, help the Union Gospel Mission. They're wonderful. They've been around for a long time. They're doing a great job. And just chip in, and you know, we don't have to run our flag up someplace. And see what we can do that's not being done already, that validates the humanity of people, that recognizes their personhood, that goes beyond buying off the problem. That's
Is there something we can learn from those old cultures that they did that we aren't doing?
How did many things we can learn from those old cultures that they did. You know, they had a hospital in at least one in Silesia, but I know there were several others, and probably more famous than two I can think of right now. When people would come in, whether it was psychiatric or physical illness, they would go through a causeway, and they had people up above the causeway, little openings in it. And as the people went, they would start, whispering, "Be of good cheer. You're going to get well. You'll be healed. You'll find healing. You're going to be okay. You're going to." They would whisper all this stuff as people went along and build up their, It's like when we go to the hospital as priests. You can open up a book and blah blah. You can read a bunch of prayers. See? But what's often forgotten is what we're trying to do with people in the hospital is to help them find their own inner strength, to respond themselves with their own inner strength, which sometimes they don't know they have. And we shouldn't ever read prayers for somebody without putting our hand on their forehead or holding their hand. We should never be without the human touch. And they do that in ancient times as well. But helping people find their own inner strength so that they can respond from the depths of their own person to these things. If people have a lot more inner strength than most people realize that they have themselves. And it's to find it and help people survive. We have to give people their own inner resources, not just our resources. Because sometimes by giving them our resources, we just cripple them more instead of helping them find their own inner resources. And I think they did a great deal of that. And I think David, I was going to ask you to tell us about the center in Aleppo, wasn't it? Were you visited?
Oh.
Yeah. But anyway, you were going to say something else.
Yeah. One of the finest books I've read in the last 20 years is written by the head of the Liberal Party, Michael Ignatieff.
Oh, yes, yes.
But he wrote it about 25 years ago. And it's called The Needs of Strangers. It's an extraordinary book in which, and I would vote for Ignatieff to be Prime Minister simply on that grounds, actually, assuming that maybe he'd be able to get some traction with it, which clearly he has shown he can't.
Somebody needs to throw gravel under his tires.
But what Ignatieff is doing in The Needs of Strangers is having a look at the gift of liberal democratic societies and the development of the kind of infrastructure for the care for the poor. And that is a remarkable gift coming out of the industrial period in society, which was so particularly brutal on people that couldn't make their own way. But what he's looking at is also that, and it refers to your introductory comments, we've developed public ways of shelter, clothing, feeding people, of warehousing. Ignatieff has this line where he says, you look at the poor these days and you see people who are, he compares it to prisons, our prisons, people who are fed and clothed. We've in some bizarre way cared for the body, in an elemental way cared for the body, because we live really in a Gnostic society. But the soul is starved. The mind is starved. The whole way in which human beings have some sense of who they are and their dignity is starved. So they are pushed in on themselves. Our daughter, Hannah, started in high school going in Edmonton down to the derelict district in Edmonton and taking children to the Friday night